everybody. Welcome back to the Noel Casler podcast, episode 134. To it. Broke out the Nancy Wilson Telecaster in honor of her performance at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame over the weekend. She once played a concert with this guitar. It was built by her longtime guitar tech, who's a good friend of mine. It's a replica of her 1963 Fender Telecaster. And she loved it, but she wanted one in blue. So she asked him to make another one, and he sold this one to me. And if you look, it's a replica. You can't really see it, but it's got all her scratches. That's from her belt buckle and stuff. It was relicked. She didn't use it long enough to put in the legit scratches, but it was all the stuff that was on her original guitar. Hell of a guitar player, Nancy Wilson. She was inducting or performing in honor of Soundgarden, one of my favorite bands from that era. I got to work with them. Obama's second inauguration of all places. And some of you guys know that story. It was a good one. Maybe I should open the show telling it, since it's Veterans Day and Obama's in the news for surprising some veterans on a plane. And I worked on both of his inaugurations, as you know, and on the second one, Soundgarden was booked to play. And in addition to playing the main downstairs event, Chris Cornell was going to perform alone at the Commander-in-Chief Ball, which is like Commander-in-Chief's Ball. It's like where all the military guys go on inauguration nights, all the generals and everybody. And it's the first place the president goes when he finally arrives at the convention center. And when Obama showed up, everything was set to go, and Chris Cornell walked out on stage, and his mic wasn't working, his guitar wasn't working. It was like a disaster, and he didn't even flinch, and he just sang like without the amplification. I forget exactly how it went down. It was a few years ago, but most people would have panicked, and his guitar tech panicked and was like, "Can I run out there and check the cable?" And I was like, if you run out there right now, you're getting shot. Like, the president's already seated. You know, this is kind of room you can't run around in. And Chris just filled up the room with his voice. It was one of the most amazing things I've ever seen. And he sang the John Fogerty tune, the Creedence Clearwater tune, "Keep a Candle in the Window." And just it was just unbelievable. What a sweet soul. What a talent. The whole band is a bunch of great guys. Matt Cameron is a phenomenal drummer. Kim, that's an open C, a modified open C. They play in a lot of open tunings too. It's kind of that weird droney sound. Something to do with the rain up there. They like that stuff. I like it too. Anyway, I'll shut up. Stop babbling about rock and roll. I did go to see Nathaniel Rateliff last night. He was playing a benefit in Connecticut, solo without his band. It was an amazing concert. Guy's really natural showman. Great songwriter and singer and stuff. Real personable, cool guy. So thanks for the music, Nathaniel. And what else? It snowed today. First snow of the year. cold weather blew in, and we were just supposed to get a little flurries and something, and we got a dusting, a solid dusting. So it was nice to do my walk and have the snow blowing in my face and covering the grass. And it's kind of crazy because on Sunday I saw dragonflies out by the pond, so it's sort of whiplash weather, but that's climate change, And in Noel's notes this week, I wrote about the fact that we didn't attend the COP30 summit, which is the UN climate summit that's happening down in Brazil right now. Governor Newsom went down there. Keir Starmer, most industrial nations go and show up, and we used to lead the way in that kind of stuff, even though we're sort of, in many ways, the biggest consumer of fossil fuels, us and probably China and maybe India. But no, probably us in China, right? I don't have the figures in front of me, but you get the idea. We did a lot of the damage, so we owe it to the world to do a lot of the cleanup and at least to lead the way in terms of science. And that's what we've traditionally done. And now we have an administration that's declared war on the environment. And, they're doing it obviously for the oil and gas industry that are their big donors, but they're also doing it to create this permanent underclass of refugees, because Trump is the kind of guy who needs a permanent enemy, right? He needs to say, oh, the other's coming to your country to take your jobs, and, they're criminals and they're going to sneak across the border and make our lives hell. Like, that's the whole gig. And it's what fascist movements are using in all the Western democracies. So they need a perpetual boogeyman, and having lots of climate refugees is perfect for that. And also it creates the kind of political instability, famine, natural disasters. They create chaos and they create instability and they damage nations, right? And you want to clean that stuff up and fix it and mitigate it and help prevent it, but that's not what these guys want to do. They want to exploit that opportunity for their own gains, to go in and sort of, mess with the countries that are weakened by this, and to have that perpetual wave of immigrants so they can, demonize refugees. And there's going to be millions of people that are going to be displaced. We're already seeing the effects of climate change in a catastrophic way in this country alone, and they don't care. They pay lip service and then keep moving, as we saw last year. Appalachia with the horrible storms, Texas. We all saw the flooding that happened this summer. Trump doesn't circle back and make sure everybody's okay. They fly down, do a photo op, throw some paper towels like they did in Puerto Rico, and they move on, or they let their corrupt buddies go in and get a no bid contract for some of the cleanup and rip the people off further. So if you're a bad guy, it's a perfect opportunity to make things worse, and that's how they view climate. And it's horrible because we really need to address it. We're obviously on the verge of a warming planet that's causing all this chaos, but we're not, I don't think, paying enough attention to the business that's now booming, that's exploiting the environment. Data centers are popping up left and right. That's all fueled by AI, right? Bitcoin mining, cryptocurrencies, all the kind of things they're involved with is what's making the planet worse. And we've deregulated all of that. The Trump administration has just taken away the rule book. So people are just building those things left and right, and they're sucking electricity, they're sucking water out of the communities, they're jacking up the rates for utilities, and people are going to continue to be marginalized. It's not just going to be climate refugees. You're going to have domestic, poverty because some company used up all the electricity in your town, and it's going to create all kinds of chaos and drama, and it's going to give more reasons for them to send in military and National Guard and kind of clamp down on this stuff. I haven't seen this movie that I think kind of deals with those themes, the new Paul Thomas Anderson film. I'm not exactly sure what it's about. I didn't want to ruin it for myself. And Johnny Greenwood did the music, who's one of my favorite guitar players. He's in Radiohead. We won't mention Radiohead otherwise because I didn't get tickets to any of their shows in Europe, and it bothers me. So if anybody's listening and you have some tickets for the London shows, hit me up. Or Denmark, Copenhagen, or Berlin. We'll travel. But back to the politics. with all the chaos and crazy stuff that Trump does every day, and don't get me wrong, it's a shit show every single day. But a lot of the coverage is about that. It's about the clips. It's about whatever crazy thing he said in the Oval Office that day. And he does crazy stuff. You know, last week you saw a guy faint and he didn't even bother to check on him. That's Trump. I wrote about that this week in Noel's notes too. He doesn't like any sort of infirmity or medical emergency. Today's Veterans Day, right? He used his visit to Arlington Cemetery to go on one of his political rants and make a fool out of himself. When I worked on Celebrity Apprentice, it was in the years that a lot of vets were coming back wounded from Afghanistan and Iraq, and it was commonplace to reach out to, you know, Wounded Warrior and a lot of these vets organizations and invite these guys to tapings, you know, to give them a little something, you know, to sort of try to say thanks and to keep them visible so people were aware that all these, you know, organizations needed support and stuff, and, you know, just to kind of ingratiate them back into the society and say thanks, because we'd obviously turned our backs on veterans in Vietnam and stuff. So we were trying to, you know, learn the lessons of the Gulf War and these post 9/11 wars, and you know, not just like marginalize people, right? So it was commonplace to invite veterans to shows. And Trump was the only show where they didn't do that. They didn't invite him in the audience because he didn't want him there. He thinks it messes with his image of strength and virility and this sort of toxic masculinity. It's like the cliched thing he said in reference to John McCain. Like, I like guys who don't get caught, you know, or don't get shot down or whatever the exact quote was. It was just disgusting. You know, you're not going to see a tougher, braver guy than the ones that got injured fighting for our country and are living with these, you know, disabilities. And it's indicative of who he is. He's a coward. He dodged the draft 5 times and, you know, spent the Vietnam era riding around the back of his daddy's limousine attacking cocktail waitresses and doing blow. Like, that's Trump. That's who he did. He had a fake bone spurs prescription diagnosis that his dad shook down a chiropractor that rented an office in one of his shitty strip malls in Queens. Like, that's how the dude got out of the Vietnam War. And he's not alone. A lot of people got out of it, and it was a crazy situation. But for a guy like that to now be commander-in-chief and be using the military as his own personal militia, essentially, that's what he's attempting to do in South America. He's not blowing up those boats, which are most likely innocent fishermen, because he cares about drug trafficking. I've seen him hang out with drug traffickers. You know, his own helicopter pilot was flying kilos from Miami up to Ohio, Kentucky, North Carolina. He got busted. Trump intervened on his behalf. The guy's case ended up in Marianne Trump's courtroom in North Jersey. She recused herself because her husband had flown in the helicopter because Trump had a business with this guy. He was doing the VIP shuttles for the casinos, and he was also a drug dealer, a serious drug dealer, flying kilos in the 80s from Miami. The front was an exotic car dealership in Miami. Like, that's textbook drug trafficking, you know? Trump wrote a letter on this guy's behalf. They read it aloud in court. He got basically a slap on the sentence. He did like 14 months up in Danbury, which is near me. It's a federal prison. While he was on trial, Trump gave him an apartment in Trump Plaza in one of his buildings, the guy and his brother. And then when the guy got out of prison, he bought a condo in Trump Tower for all cash and was back in business. So Trump's had a hand in drug dealing and drug trafficking his whole time. You don't think they were selling cocaine in his casinos and in the poker dens in his buildings? Of course they are. But he gets a cut of it. So now he's trying to scale that up. Now he's president, and he sees how much money narco traffickers might be making. Or not might be, are making, right? So he wants a piece of that. He's not going after cartels to eradicate them. He wants a piece of the action. Or whatever government he topples in Venezuela, he wants the new government to be sympathetic to him and to give him a piece of the action. It's textbook mob boss stuff, you know. It's a nice country he got there. I'd be ashamed if something happened to it, you know. Look how many warships he has in the Caribbean. There's like over a dozen battleships lined up. There's troops. He's going to do something, and he's usurping Congress right? He's just not getting a declaration of war from Congress. He's not listening to any generals that are worth their salt, and anybody who would stand up to him has been purged from the Pentagon. He's got this lickspittle Secretary of Defense, now the Secretary of War, who was an alcoholic idiot at Fox News. I got buddies who worked there, and that guy was respected by no one. You know, he's a clown, as you can see, and he's a fellow sexual predator. So it's really quite dangerous, obviously, right? And to see this buffoonery and this insanity on Veterans Day is nuts, right? But my point about like paying attention to what he's doing every day, we sort of ignore the bigger, less sexy things that are going down in terms of the environment. It leaked today that they're planning, the Department of the Interior is planning on opening up drilling off the coast of California, which we haven't done, I think, since 2015. We basically haven't done it since 1969. There was this horrible oil spill off the coast of Santa Barbara, and it helped kickstart the modern environmental movement. And the California state coastline, which is like 3 miles out, you know, they haven't allowed anybody to drill. But now they're going to kind of open that up. He's going to force that open. And Newsom is going to, you know, protest and try to stop him. But it's insane. It's the drill baby drill thing. You want to look off of Santa Barbara and see a big oil rig? And the few that have already existed, they've had problems. They've leaked. They've put toxic chemicals back into the water. It's just it's a disaster. It's a disaster. And they said they might announce doing this as early as this week. And that probably won't get a lot of attention because he's going to do all kinds of crazy stuff between now and whenever they announce it, right? It's his clips that get shared every day that create most of the dialogue around Trump. And I understand why. It's outrageous. But we've been looking at that for 10 years now. Like, we get the deal. That's bottom-feeding sort of political discourse, is sharing a Trump clip with a pithy comment on top of it. Like, that's the easiest way to get interactions. But it's not diving deep into what we're really facing and trying to, you know, educate people on the big picture of how much damage he could do, even if we get the opportunity to vote him out in 3 years and vote out the majority in the House in next year or the Senate. You know, everyone's assuming we're going to have free and fair elections. And that's a big assumption because they're doing all they can to make sure it's not fair. And a big part of that gamble, which was ridiculous, which we'll get into in a minute, like the folding of the Democratic Party the other day, a lot of that strategy was like, well, they'll have to own the fact that they don't extend the ACA tax credits and they take away everybody's health care and they raise the rates on the remaining people who are lucky enough to still have it. They're going to own that going into the midterms. You're assuming you're going to have a fair election in the midterms. And I don't think we had a fair election last time. And we see what he's done, you know, with January 20th or January 2020, right? He just retroactively pardoned Giuliani, Sidney, whatever the hell her name was, you know, all these freaks, the alternate electors. Even that term is in the vernacular now. There's no such thing as alternate electors. They were pretending that they were legitimate electors up in Wisconsin. And it's like the alternative facts things. It's now in the public discourse that they were somehow some like legit people acting on a noble behalf on terms of President Trump. It was just one of the many ways he tried to overturn that election and almost got away with it. You have to assume next time he will get away with it. And the people around him are doing all they can to make sure that he'll get away with it because they know from last Tuesday that they're not going to win legitimately. Right? We saw people show up at the polls. We saw the repudiation of Trump and MAGA in places that normally they would have had a chance, you know, in Virginia and places in New Jersey and stuff. Places he was popular, he lost in a lot of smaller elections in Texas and all these other places. So they know they're going to get their asses handed to them if they let it become a legitimate election. And they're going to do all they can to avoid that. So by folding on Sunday in secret 8 senators, you know, it was a ridiculous move. It was just once again getting played, giving them the benefit of the doubt, taking a promise of a vote that even if it passed in the Senate, there's no way Speaker Johnson is going to let a vote go to extending the tax credits. He'll make up some excuse and skip town. And we'll be screwed. And they know that. And their excuse was like standing up to Trump doesn't work. That's bullshit. You had the momentum on your side. I don't want people going hungry. And I don't like the way people act like politics is a sport, you know? This on again, off again stuff with the SNAP benefits was driving me nuts. You know, the stay that KBJ, you know, the procedural motion that she, you know, ruled in favor of Trump essentially on Friday night was a strategy to force the appeals court to make a decision, and she was correct. They made the right decision yesterday and, you know, said that he couldn't withhold these benefits, right? But people were talking about that like it was like a football game. Like, I'm so gleeful at this brilliant strategy. Well, there was a lot of moms who thought they were getting their benefits turned back on, who probably showed up at a supermarket, filled their shopping carts, and got to the register and learned it was back off again, you know, and their benefits hadn't been put on their cards. And that kind of stuff is insane. So don't think for a moment I'm not thinking about the people that are going without because of this. 1 in 8 Americans receive SNAP benefits. I grew up in a neighborhood in my elementary school years with a single mom, you know, very multi-ethnic, lots of people working hard, people getting benefits. They wouldn't survive without them. And nobody was not working. That's just so you can put food on the table, keep the lights on, and pay the rent. And you're still barely getting by. You know, and that was 40, 50 years ago. Think of it now. And when everything's inflated and crazy. People don't stand a chance. And you have to feed people. You have to give people the basic material necessities to be human beings if you want a society, right? If you want a functioning society, I said this again in Noel's notes, you know, the Napoleonic saying an army marches on its belly, on its stomach rather. It means you got to feed people if you want them to fight on your behalf. And the whole theory of MAGAism is this militant nationalism about the U.S. and stuff, right? So in one hand, they're saying, make America great again. And on the other, they're saying, but we're not going to feed you or give you health care. How is that a great and prosperous nation? It's not. And that shows you what their true aim is to destroy the United States and create a permanent underclass. Because an underclass of people in poor health with no education and no food on the table become desperate. So they break laws, they fall into addiction and all kinds of other things that happen in poverty. They don't live up to their potential because they're struggling to put food on the table and going hungry as kids. You can't study in school when you got an empty stomach. You know, that was me and my classmates. Like, it was, you know, I know what it's like to worry as a child, you know, and to watch your parents, you know, struggle. And that's a horrible, horrible burden to put on human beings and on generations. And that, you know, I was lucky. But, like, that's only gotten worse. That stuff is an epidemic now. There's an epidemic of homeless families in shelters, unhoused people. You know, like, we're failing as a society. And that should be our objective because we're the richest nation on the planet. And everything they're doing is to enable the billionaires, you know, the corporations, the companies and corporations that are destroying us, from the oil and gas companies to the Bitcoin mining, you know, like I was saying at the top of the show. All of this stuff is not good for you. And the wealth inequality is getting to the point that you can't do anything about it. And that's why they bought a president. That's why they purchased Donald Trump, because they knew his social policies would essentially dismantle the federal government and make it so nobody could do anything about it. And that's exactly what they did. It's what they did on day one. That's why Elon Musk went in there with Doge. It's why they put a bunch of, you know, maniacs in charge at the DOJ. It's why they put people like Lee Zeldin at the EPA. These people are all working on behalf of industry to destroy a functioning bureaucracy that might someday hold them accountable and make them play by the rules. And now they're going after healthcare. They're not going to come up with a plan to give you better health insurance. You're just not going to have health insurance unless you're rich or you get it at your job, if you're lucky enough to have a job. And we're not even getting the economic numbers, not just because of the shutdown, because they're firing everybody who tells the truth about, inflation and hiring statistics. The Bureau of Labor Statistics. You can't even trust the BLS anymore. You guys work in business. You work at companies. If you don't have records that you can believe, you don't know what they're doing. And that's Trump. That's been his MO forever. That's what he got in trouble for in New York, was cooking the books. He was doing it to cheat his banks, his lenders. He was doing it to cheat the government out of his taxes. And now our government is cheating, right? But the victim of a government cheating is the American people first and foremost, and by extension, our allies, the other democracies that rely on us. And they're not relying on us anymore. Our biggest trading partner is Canada. Second biggest is Mexico. We're screwing them both over. Our biggest international ally is the United Kingdom. They stopped sharing intelligence information with us today because they don't trust us, because we're bombing innocent people in the Caribbean and they know it's fucked up, So they're like, we're not going to give you our data, whatever that data is. It's above my pay grade, and we obviously probably don't need their help, but that should be embarrassing. There was a story where Kash Patel went to meet the head of MI5 and he showed up in a hoodie and a trucker's cap. The head of MI5. Like, these are serious British people. You show up in a goddamn suit, ready to do business. You're representing the United States of America. This is our biggest, one of our hugest allies traditionally. Like, what are you doing? And what they asked him to do was to keep somebody on staff because they were purging so many people at the FBI. There was somebody who was placed in London who was keeping an eye on this Chinese embassy that they knew was spying on them, and they needed our information, our intelligence, operative to continue doing his job. And Kash promised the guy he would do it, and then he fired the guy anyway. We're screwing over our allies, and we're making the world a dangerous place. And the only people he's cozying up to are the bad guys. Donald Trump, for that matter, right? He had Orban in the Oval Office on Friday. He had the new president of Syria in there yesterday, who's throwing Druze people off of buildings, and killing anybody who's in opposition to him, just murdering them, firing squads and stuff. The guy was the head of Al-Qaeda in Syria. He was a terrorist. And that's a tough neighborhood, I get it, but Trump has got it like fanboying for this guy, telling him how handsome he is and taking selfies with him in the Oval Office. This is a dangerous guy. This is not instant democracy in Syria. This is a bad dude. This is a guy who's operating with a warlord's mentality. This is not who we are as the United States, but Trump likes that. He likes thuggery. He likes toxic masculinity. It's part of what I wrote about this week too, is that he'd have all these fake tough guys and real tough guys, like at the after parties at Celebrity Apprentice. It would be bikers and Russian mobsters, and it was meant to show you like, hey, these are tough people. Don't mess with them. Don't get out of line or you're going to get in trouble. Trump likes that kind of shit. That's what Keith Schiller and all his bodyguards, these big lunkhead guys, because people get cowed by that and they get scared to ask questions and they get scared to take pictures and stuff. I almost got beat up by a pretty well-known one of those guys for taking his picture at the after party, right? But it's a mob mentality. It's like, don't look over here. This ain't none of your business. This doesn't concern you. And that's what Trump's likes on the or the international stage, right? Those are the guys he likes. Egypt, right? El Sisi. He went and did that, the big summit when he was the peace president who was supposed to get the Nobel Peace Prize because he brought peace to the Mideast. What happened to that? Not a lot of follow-up on that. I mean, it's a freaking joke. And he's cozying up to, people who are dictators. They're warlords. They don't allow freedom of the press or free of fair elections. They didn't have a fair election in Egypt last time. They put down the Arab Spring. They're getting money from MBS, who's coming to the White House soon. Right? Basically, the ruler of Saudi Arabia who ordered a Washington Post reporter to be dismembered in the Turkish embassy in Turkey. Like it was a Saudi embassy, right, in Turkey, and they dismembered. The guy was showing up to get his wedding license, and they cut him up. And we know it was him. It wasn't even a question. Like, that's who did it. Our intelligence agencies knew it. And Trump's like, it sucks to be you. And Jared had business with the guy. And now the guy is coming to D.C. And a bunch of comedians just went and did his comedy festival. They're whitewashing. Murder. Thuggery. The kind of things we're not supposed to stand for. And I'm well aware of our history. I understand the CIA and all kinds of things that we've done. And my grandfather was involved a lot of that. My other grandfather was NSA. I understand the complexities of the world, and sometimes the government, has to sidle up to bad dudes for the greater good. But that's not what's happening here. Trump is not doing it for the greater good. And I'm not excusing when it was done in the past, because it was done for capitalism, and it was done to strengthen us while it hurt other people, developing nations. And it's why you have the problems you have in the global south now. So sort of imperialistic colonial things were never a good idea, and the hope of democracy is that we moved out of that, right? The maturation of the Western democracy, of your United Kingdoms and United States and, Germany, and going to the East, Japan, all these countries that had these sort of empires, like, we're not trying to do that anymore for a long time, right? We were trying to be like, yep, that was fucked up. We admit it. Let's chill out here and try to make this right to some extent. That's not Trump. That's not what's happening now. We're backsliding, and we're not doing it. Last time it was done for the nation, right? For queen and country, so to speak. That's not even what's happening now. Now it's just being done for Trump, just to fill his pocketbook and his buddies' pocketbooks. It's not even, they're not even pretending they're doing it for the greater good of our citizens. And he thinks he can throw pennies at people and buy their loyalty. He's going to give everybody a $2,000 dividend, middle class and working class people, because of his tariffs that are screwing up the global economy and screwing over our neighbors. And a lot of people will buy that bullshit. They'll be like, Biden didn't give me $2,000. Biden gave you a job back, and he got you out of a pandemic that probably would have killed you if you didn't have, the rollout that we had of vaccines and stuff, and the infrastructure bill. Right? All of that is being dismantled. It's all being thrown in the garbage so Trump can give another $1 trillion tax cut to the wealthiest Americans, and he's going to pay for it by stealing your health care. I'm losing my health care in July, right? I've had it for 15 years, getting it through the ACA. I get it through the exchange. Freelancers like me, if you're an artist, you work in television, whatever, you don't work at a corporation that's going to give you health insurance. It was the only time I had health insurance in my adult life, was what Obama did, right? It wasn't perfect, but I was grateful for it. It worked for me. And that's going away. They literally, New York State sent me a letter like, it's gone. And we'll be on our own and paying $2,000 a month, whatever it is. The ripple effects of that are just going to be catastrophic in this country. People are going to die, as Bernie Sanders says. Like, there's studies, 50,000 people will die just from losing their health insurance probably next year. And that's what we have to pay attention to, and that's what we had to stand up to. And that's what we had an opportunity with the shutdown to do. Nobody likes the shutdown, but Trump was the one who was being held accountable for it. And the chaos that we would have gone into the holiday season with, which we'll still probably have in terms of air traffic controllers and all this stuff, they would have owned that. That would have been on them, and it would have been immediate, and it would have been a great opportunity to say, this is what happened. We're not even a year into this presidency. The government's been shut down for a month and a half. The planes aren't running. The economy's in the tank. There's troops in American cities. People are getting locked up and we can't find them again. They're getting abused on a daily basis.
If you go on the internet, as I'm sure most of you do, the videos that you see, and this is to my point as well about sharing Trump's clips all the time and his crazy shit. Like, I get the desire for the dumb things he said, but he's always going to say dumb stuff. He's fucking out of his mind. He's a drug-addicted, brain-damaged, very unhealthy, narcissistic freak, okay, who was in poor health 15 years ago. We get that. Share some of the videos of what the ICE agents are doing in his name, because that's terror. They're terrorizing innocent people. And they're doing it every day, all day long. And those aggressions will add up, and they will weaken the communities that you need in the midterms, right, and the next election. And that's why it's blue cities that he's doing it to, right? He's trying to literally attack the electorate, and he'll go in there after the fact with troops and say, it's election day, come on out. You want a piece of that? You saw what happened to your cousin. You know, it's not like, it doesn't take rocket scientists to figure out the play here. And that's what we had to keep front and center in the consciousness of the American people. And that was happening. That election last night was momentum. The No Kings thing was momentum. Right? And we just offered that up to acquiesce to this guy and give him back the pulpit. You know, and the momentum, and the next day he was like, screw you air traffic controllers that didn't show up to work. You're fired. You might as well quit. I hate you. And the ones that did work, I'm going to give you 10 grand, like just out of the blue. And people were like, where are you going to pay for it? And he's like, I don't know. Like, it's just insanity. This is not how governments work. Right? And the more you can highlight his dysfunction, the better off you are. Because this has to break. Right? You have to get to the breaking point where everybody realizes how screwed we are. Even the townie guys that don't know any better, that buy the bullshit, that see him waving a flag and think he's a good dude because everybody in their community votes Republican and their granddaddy voted Republican and their parents voted for Reagan. You know, I grew up with all these guys. They're not mean-spirited, most of them. They don't know any better. Their lives are pretty like the kids' sports team, the job, the leafy suburbs they live in, getting a truck, getting a car, going to Florida, sending their kids to the prom. You know, just hard-working, normal people. But that culture has been so permeated with conservatism and with the sort of xenophobic, racist mentality that's offered them on Fox News and right-wing podcasts and all the sort of bullshit, pseudo-patriotic post-9/11 crap and pablum that they're fed has created, you know, a condition where the truth doesn't really seep in because they've been offered so many boogeymen, they don't trust the left. You know, and that's why they're always playing up issues, you know, the transgender stuff and the crime and all this crazy shit, which doesn't exist, but these people don't know any better because they don't really go to the city. They don't know other people besides the other, like, sort of, you know, pasty townies they hang out with. And then when they go to the city, there are problems. So they're like, oh, it does kind of look scary. There are, like, you know, people on the streets and stuff. Yeah. Yeah, because we have problems and we have to fix them and address them. But it doesn't mean you have to live in terror. And it certainly doesn't mean you should be voting for somebody who's going to make it worse. Because you have to ultimately understand a society is only as strong as its weakest link, as its most vulnerable. And you have to protect those people. You don't demonize them. You'll never get anywhere that way. It's like war. It doesn't really ever solve anything. It just creates more suffering. Real problems get solved by understanding, by compassion, you know, by not really picking a side, but understanding the whole condition. And that's what we have to do here. We have to sort of understand the mindset and the mentality of the people that fell for this bullshit. You know, it's easy to demonize them and say they're all idiots, and I do a lot of that, you know. But I'm a comedian, I can. But, you know, I talk that way, but in my heart I care about these people because they're going to get screwed. We're all going to get screwed. I care about all people, all humanity, all creatures, man. Half of what I'm doing is for the bugs and the birds and all these innocent creatures that are getting, you know, just destroyed by what we're doing to this planet, including people. And we have to have compassion for all living beings. We can't just be like, those things are bad, those people are bad, that country is bad, and destroy it and think that we're going to have a great life over here. It just doesn't happen. And a lot of what we're seeing in the world is reaping what we've sowed from environmental exploitation, right? From warfare, from, colonial sort of imperialistic capitalist notions to protect a company, in a country in South America or Central America, to make it a sort of, puppet for the CIA or for a conservative, Republican government that's worried about some distant ties to communism or something. So they're going to fund some right-wing general to run the place and let people suffer and not have free elections and a free press. When you rule that way, there's karma, there's consequences. And we're suffering from those consequences. And the only way out of it is to really, truly understand it. And it's hard to get people to do that. For two reasons. One, when they're in the midst of their problems, they're going to be like, yeah, but I can't put food on the table. The price of gas is through the roof. The price of eggs, if eggs are through the roof. And this guy's saying he's going to fix that. And he looks and talks like the people I know. And your other guy doesn't. And he's fallen asleep or whatever, like they were saying of Biden. Look at Trump. He's nodding out in the Oval Office because he's on benzos, because he takes benzos after snorting Adderall all night, And Biden wasn't in great health, obviously, right? He'd lost a step or two, but his policies were working. The people around him weren't maniacs. I'm not going to lose a night of sleep, or I wasn't wondering what they were going to do next. I very much feel that way with Pete Hegseth, right? With a guy, with Trump, who says he wants to test nuclear weapons, because how do you know if they work if you don't test them? The dude said that. We know they work, and you never want to use them again. You want the president who understands under no circumstance do we want to be using these things. Trump wants to just test them. What does that mean? Where are you going to test them? And a guy like that, trust me, would drop a bomb on some country. He's itching to do that. He would blow the whole place up rather than be humiliated. And that's also what we're facing. The No Kings thing happened Monday morning. He's got a freaking payloader and he's destroying the East Wing. I'm never going to believe, obviously he was going to build the ballroom, but I have no doubt that at some point over that weekend on Sunday, he called up somebody and was like, Monday morning, you're ripping that fucking thing down. Because that's who he is. He gets mad and he breaks things. That's what he did with Trump Tower. He was getting held up and he was supposed to hire union labor, and he freaked out and got all these Polish undocumented workers and sent them in there with fucking hammers and stuff. They didn't even have hard hats and goggles. They demolished the place with jackhammers and shit with no safety equipment. And he destroyed the freezes. This is Bonwit Teller. It was his beautiful old building on Fifth Avenue. It was an old department store. He tore it down to build his first tower, Trump Tower. That's what he does. He freaks out and he just destroys shit. So he'll do that same thing when he loses an election, as we saw in January 2020. He already showed you what he did. He lost and he wanted to destroy the place. He had a rally. Most presidents lose. You try to be dignified. You hand it over to your, whoever beat you, and you say, have a nice life, and you go. That's what he could have done. He could have gone down to the golf course, whatever. That's not what he did. He stole all his documents that he could sell and use for collateral that would get him favors with other nations, with other bad actors. And then he told everybody to come to D.C. and protest and fight and destroy the Capitol, and sent him up there to do that. And he almost got away with it. If Pence had gotten in that limousine, Trump would probably be president still from then on, because they would have killed Pence. They would have said he had a heart attack or something. I'll never not believe that wasn't part of the plan. And I think Pence knew. He was like, if I get in that car, somebody up in this building is going to not certify the results and say Trump, has to still be president and they'll declare martial law. I don't remember exactly all the details or how I could say it would have gamed out, but it would have been very sketchy. We came very close to losing our democracy on that day. He should have been arrested that day. A sane country would have arrested Donald Trump that day. Or at least, January 21st after Biden took office. He wouldn't have appointed Merrick Garland, who didn't do anything about it, as now is being revealed further. Carol Leonnig has a new book, The Washington Post, about, how he didn't take any action. And I was saying at the time is not on your side. You better do something. And I would get, people would always get in your comments online like, nope, when you come for the king, you got to make sure you get all your, facts straight. So they're just starting at the bottom and working their way to the top. I love it. It's a great strategy. Like, I had so many people saying that shit. And what happened? Nothing. He never got to the top. And all the guys he rounded up, that we spent almost $3 billion on that investigation. It was like $2.9 billion was spent on the January 6th investigation, on all the people that had to pour over hours of videotape and stuff to prosecute those cases. They got let out on the first hour of Trump getting sworn in again. And now they're committing crimes all across the country. I mean, Maddow had a piece on that the other night. Like, they're getting arrested for kidnapping, rape, sexual assault, violence, because they're thugs. They're scumbags. And that's who he was like, bring all the scumbags, and attack the government. And now he's building an army. Now he's paying these ICE officers, right? So he is getting some people, that you should fear and understand will do a lot of bad things on behalf of the leader, right? So, obviously that's in a bit of opposition to what I was saying before about understanding, the circumstances that allow people to vote for Donald Trump. Like, people can get radicalized, and that's what he's doing. He's clearly radicalizing a huge element of the American population, right? That should be the lead story, and we have to soberly and seriously confront that and act accordingly and deal with that, okay? But my point also is the end of conflict, and all this strife and this sort of warfare, internecine warfare, right, where both sides eventually lose. That's what's happening, right? And until we really understand that we're all one people, that this thing is a whole, it's the right hand fighting the left, and the host body is going to get destroyed no matter what. Until we really understand that and can approach this stuff with awareness, we can't really begin to dig ourselves out of this, and we have to do that with compassion and empathy. And the circumstances of the shutdown create an opportunity to do that, right? Because it was clearly on him. It was one of these few times where his voters understood that he was really kind of fucking up. And we needed to let that sink in. Yeah, it's radical to keep the government shut down, but we're kind of at the last stand here, right? We're once again racing the clock, like I was saying about Merrick Garland. Time is not on our side. A year from now, we have midterm elections. If they're not free elections, we're screwed. If we have a situation where we're in martial law, or he's starting a war somewhere in South America, which he'll probably have done before then, obviously, but God knows what kind of crazy stuff they dream up. And we're not going to the polls in a democratic way that we've always done in the last 250 years of this country. We got a problem on our hands. And it's a lot better to deal with it now. And the shutdown was an opportunity to deal with that, and an opportunity to educate the people as to what was really happening. Because it was getting hard for them to spin it on Fox News and the podcasts and all this stuff. And now that's kind of all gone. And now Trump can just, stand in the bully pulpit once again and blame it all on the Democrats and label us all radical left lunatics. He can just feed the poison. Right? And the influencer coverage of him is just retweeting what he's saying. Don't make him so big. Make the problems he's causing the focus. right? Explain to people what's happening to the environment, what it means to have data centers everywhere, what it means to let SpaceX fill up the night sky with satellites, what it means to give Elon Musk a $1 trillion raise to make him the world's first trillionaire, a guy who helped Trump steal the election last year and destroyed basically the town square that was Twitter so they could own it, a Bond villain if ever there was one, right? And there's going to be 100 of those guys, in 10 years with, Sam Altman and all this kind of stuff and all these crypto bros. And another thing with all this cryptocurrency stuff is like what Trump is doing, like in South America, shaking down these countries and stuff. Who's to say, like, if he's blowing up the fishermen or the drug dealers or whatever, and a cartel's like, I don't want my boats getting blown up anymore. I just bought $1 billion of World Liberty Financial Trump meme coins. I just deposited $1 billion in your bank account. Can you maybe lay off the rockets? Trump would do that because now you're in business with him. Now he's getting a piece of the action. And cryptocurrency and Bitcoin and all this stuff allows you to do that. The dark web, the Ross Ulbricht guy that he pardoned, that guy was serving consecutive life sentences because people died. He had a website where you could hire hitmen, where you could do, child porn and buy drugs. It's where drug dealers laundered money. The same with the CZ guy, the Binance dude that he just pardoned. Same deal. He's doing that because he wants those mechanisms, right? He wants a dirty, dark marketplace where people can do things behind the scenes that are going to benefit him. What do you think the Epstein stuff was? It was all about collecting compromise. The sex trafficking was the point, but the point of making young girls available to wealthy men was to give them something they couldn't normally get in their regular lives, right? It's not hard for a billionaire to get laid. Not to be crass, but you know what I mean? These guys could go out in Palm Beach and meet somebody in a bar, and I don't mean that like misogynistically. Guys, girls, whatever. You got money, you're driving around in a fancy car, like you're going to meet somebody. You got to living in a big mansion, right? So it wasn't that they needed to hook up. They wanted something that was illicit that nobody else could get, like the sort of caviar mentality of like, oh, but a 15-year-old girl. That's what Epstein was selling. It's sick. It's perverse, but there's a market for it amongst these scumbags. And Trump would pull people into that world, and so would other guys. And once he did, he owned you, because then he had compromise over you. And that's what Howard Lutnick, who was Epstein's next-door neighbor, who bought his townhouse from Jeff's brother, was all about. That's what Ghislaine Maxwell is all about, right? Melania was in that world. Maxwell's about to get pardoned by Trump. They're treating her like a queen in this prison in Texas and helping her write up her plea to Trump to lift her sentence. I can't think of the legal term right now. It's not a pardon, but to commute her sentence. And then where's she going to go? She's going to go back into business somewhere. She'll probably end up in Palm Beach doing the same thing. Right? Or she'll be in UAE or somewhere directing something through these other things, through these other sketchy people that he's pardoned. It'll be happening online. You'll be paying for it with Bitcoin or something. Right? The netherworld is where Trump swims in. And that world that always existed with the bad bankers and the businessmen and all the sketchy stuff, but they had so much money that nobody was going to mess with them really, because they live in a big mansion and you're just a local cop or a local lawyer or DA. Nobody wants to rock that boat. Right? That's how those guys got away with that for so long. But now those guys are in charge of the United States government, essentially. And now they're taking that playbook and using it on a global scale. That's what we're up against. That's what we're dealing with now. And you have to let some of that sink into people. You have to let that permeate the suburbs. That reality of what we're really up against. And the only way to do that is to stand up to Donald Trump. It's not to acquiesce. It's not to fold, to live to fight another day. You might not get the other day. Okay? Well, that's enough of a rant, I think. I think I should get going now. Listen, I know this is all like a roller coaster, and I get a lot of nice comments when I do these podcasts. I'm thrilled that everybody's listening. You can watch and listen to this for free on Patreon. You don't have to watch the commercials on YouTube or anything. And if you feel like supporting it, you can do it on Patreon. You can sign up for Noel's Notes. That's my job. It comes out every Sunday. I work really hard on it. It's not just a daily thing. This is what Trump said. I try to kind of, say my piece. And I work on it all week. And it's, it's lengthy. It's a couple thousand words or more. But it's meant to be more like my version of a New Yorker article or something. I'm not equating myself with that. But, it's meant to be read on a Sunday and to take your time with. So for those that read, I appreciate it. Not that the rest of you guys don't read. You know what I mean? All you guys. I appreciate you guys, and I know how tough this is, and I appreciate all the support. I need you guys as much as whatever comfort some people sometimes say they get from this show, I would do it more, and I will try to do it more. I don't want to just talk. It's easy to just talk. I try to not to come on here unless I feel like I have something to say. I don't want to just add to the rancor and the pain and whatever. And usually, if I could distill what I have to say, it's just take care of each other. Take care of yourselves. Breathe. Realize that the world is still beautiful, and as fraught and perilous as this moment is, we have each other. We have been gifted this time and this life. And the good news is it's almost so drastic that you have to bend towards like a transformation. That's how we get out of this. This is almost like the path to enlightenment for our nation, because we're either going to go down in flames or we're going to get over this, and we're going to realize we can never do this again, and we need to lift each other up, right? And we need to look out for our fellow man. And just because somebody speaks a different language and started out somewhere more disadvantaged than where I live, doesn't mean I treat them like the enemy. It means I help them out, and I give them a purchase in this land, and I help them with what they need in life. And in return, you get loyalty and hard work, and they help strengthen and build your communities, and they give you things you haven't seen before, and they make everybody's lives richer. That's what real wealth is. It's a multicultural, miasma of like beauty in life. Who wants to go to a garden that has one kind of flower? It gets boring. You want to see all kinds of different stuff, right? You go to a food court in a mall, they got all kinds of different stuff there. It's all kind of tastes the same, but you know what I mean, right? Don't be afraid of the other. Don't be afraid of the different facets on a jewel. They're all there to help the light get reflected. And that's what we need to understand. And that's what I believe we will understand. I do believe we're heading towards that. We have to. We have no other choice. We're here to learn stuff. Life is about lessons, man. It's about growth. Anyway, until I see you next time, I appreciate it. You can check me out on Noel's Notes, Substack, all the socials. For now, I'm going to say goodbye. Love you guys. Till next time. Peace.